Now we have a basic floor, but we have to update this to include the next thing, which is extruding up to create walls. And that might be a little different because if you look at some of the ideas on the mood board that I have, I plan to have certain design elements, such as recessed walls to have retired capes and cowls from this team, which is totally ripped off of this image. And it also has this receding floor so that there's an upper part above this flat plane. But we also want to continue to focus on real-world scale. If this person is 1.8 meters tall, we probably want something that's about 2.2 meters to represent the height of where that cowl recess is. So that means that we would be up in the air a little bit. Am I recording? Did I hit go? I did hit go. That would mean that we have the 1.8 meters tall for the cowl, plus about half a meter of breathing space above it, plus a spot that we can now have a light in that recess. So I'm going to extrude this again and go directly into translate mode because I want to move this more accurately. And again, using using the what's it called over here, the relative transform tool or the input line tool. Under relative transform, I can use the Y arrow, which represents up and down, to manually type in 2.2 meters. And that looks pretty accurate, right? Let's test with our dude. We can move him up exactly 0.5. And that means that because of how we set our scene up, we'll be directly on this next plane. Uh-oh, no it wasn't. That means I might have done something wrong. Oh. The floor was never at 0.0. So let's correct that really fast. I'm going to go into face mode. Just like with edges, we can select whole loops by clicking one and then shift double clicking a neighbor. What it's going to try and do is follow the perpendicular edge flow of this. Not necessarily perpendicular, but the edge flow wherein it follows along these quads. Similarly, I'll select this one and shift double click that. And then lastly, our big face in the middle. And we can make sure we're on grid with X, and now it's on grid. How to select just these bottom faces? Well, this is sort of where the 3D workflow skills show a noob from a ninja. If I go into the side view, I can use a box to select all of these faces at once. I can then use Alt, Shift, and left click to remove these upper faces, and Shift and left click to remove these ones. So we start with a selection we know is too aggressive, but from a certain view, we can very easily deselect. So now we don't have the wall, and we don't have the ground plane faces. Oh, we still do. Oh, you know what it is? Control or Shift and left click reverses the selection, so anything selected will become deselected, anything deselected will become selected. I think we want Control Shift, and that will always Control select. All right. Control and left click will always deselect. So we can fix our previous problem by going to absolute transform and saying 0.5. And now it's immediately at the 0.5 mark. And as for these, this top part, I'm just going to edge snap it to, or grid snap it to something that looks correct. But as I was saying, let's try it out with our reference. So I'm going to go into object mode with F8. I can select this. I should now be able to type in on the y-axis 0.5. And again, that problem I had where it turned out it wasn't on the grid, that's the sort of thing where it's useful to know about, and it is important eventually. But when you're starting out, it can really just throw you through a loop and suck, and just keep you from working. So if it's tripping you up, don't worry too hard about it. Just eventually get to the next stage. And as long as it looks correct, then keep working. So this looks like a person who kind of fits in this recess now, right? If this is his head, yeah, I believe that. And now we can close off these various recesses. I'm going to do these cowl recesses first because they're going to have the most trouble. If I were to just, how to do this? There's a couple ways you could do this. I could select these two faces, extrude them out, and then use verts to connect them to there and there. Or I could select these two faces, connect these two faces, and then subdivide them to have a line directly down the middle. So I think I'll do that. So I'm going to select this edge and this edge. And again, I will shift and right click to get my various tools. And I think I want the bridge tool. The bridge tool, like all the other tools, gives you the ability to modify it. So here's that most recent input of the bridge tool, and I'm going to bring these divisions down to 1. I can then select these two and hit G, which again does the same tool that you just used. And G. Divisions, bring it down. Everybody follow? I think there's a couple other tools that are pretty cool. I think draw polygon is one. I might be wrong. Yeah, we'll stick with the basics. So shift, bridge, keep taking the divisions down. We're slowly going to have these filled in with a roof. Divisions down to 1. So on and so forth. Shift to make a selection. Shift, right click, bridge. Get my divisions at 1. And connect these. Oh yeah, a handy tool to know in Maya is, just as a navigation aspect to benefit you, is if you hit F, it'll zoom to focus on whatever you have selected. And this is one of those times where the varying multitude of ways you can model might offer beneficial alternatives. For instance, this is one of those times when it might have been really nice to just model one of these cowl recesses and then duplicate it all the way around. But this is fine. I'm almost done. Much like programming, 3D often refers to the dry principle, or don't repeat yourself principle. Right now I'm repeating myself a lot, and that's bad. There's probably a modeling workflow that would repeat this less. But, there you go. I do have one last thing I want to work on, which is, if we look at this from the top view, you'll notice one thing that's going to bug me slightly, which is, because we filled between these two polygons and then divided it, these are not mathematically correct lined up with this other vertex on the ground. So they're going to lose some of that roundness of the room. We can fix this with the V key and using this tool, which will mean snap everything except the y-axis. We can snap it to that. You'll notice the difference in this one, I think. So because I didn't use that everything except button, it snapped it literally to that polygon. So instead, if I hold V and click on this, which means the blue arrow and the red arrow, but not the green arrow, oh, maybe it doesn't anyway. Well, we can fix this by then just selecting it and going up. So now I can hold, you'll notice it works for individual arrows. So I can get it snapped to these bottom ones. So you have that cylindrical nature. And then just use the individual arrow to line it up with its brethren over here. So just the y-axis and up. Alright, that's looking good. Now one thing I'm going to do is separate these into separate objects, because oftentimes it's going to be very annoying to be trying to look at this and have these walls block my scene. So what I can do is go to face mode, I'll go into the side view, and I'll select all of these. And, well, actually I have to do a little more modeling first. Cancel that, but hold your horses. So if I select all of these edge loops again, and you'll notice that it's letting the recess stay by itself there. Now we can go up and create the next part of this. So shift right click for extrude edge. I'll just manually move it up. I don't know. I can grid snap this if I like. Yeah, it looks like it's got a good spot right there. And I want that low ceiling, so I think that's as far as it's going to go. Now I have another problem, which is I want this recess to also have a landing, kind of like the cowl location did. And sadly, this is one of those things where in 3D you have to do a little more hand modeling. So if I were to say shift extrude, and then just extrude everything to the center, the problem is we're going to get this really ugly geometry right here and right here, where we basically have two parallel lines right on top of each other. So instead we want to close this out. I'm going to select all of these ones that are here. And this is an example of getting the proper view before you make the proper selection. If I want to select these edges, the problem I'm going to have is that I'm hovering over this, but I also might be hovering very close to these edges over here. So if I just rotate my view so that's off, that's aligned against the endless empty scene, now it's much easier to make this selection. Right? And extrude. And this is the case where I might eyeball it. So I'm going to extrude and then scale until it's as close to scaled along here as possible. That's pretty good. Let's see if I can get this right. I worked with a client on a Blender project all break, so I'm getting back into Maya right now. Edit mesh tool. I got to edit mesh, merge components. I can adjust this threshold until hopefully it merges anything that's on top of each other. And thus, these verts will so let's try that. Apply. Nope. Select all. Wait, hold on. Alright, so that merged it. Cool. So now these are connected. And now, lastly, I can select this giant edge loop. Oh wait, I gotta finish up these. For these, because they're nice and flat, they're a little easier. And say shift, extrude edge. Alright, so I want to snap this point to that point and hopefully have it line up there. And this creates a little bit of a problem. So I need to change where the pivot point is on this so that the snap happens at the right point. So what I can do is hold D, which changes the pivot point temporarily, and then V, which changes it to vertex snap, and then switch it to over there. Now when I hold V and snap, it snaps to this other vertex. Let's do it over here to show that again. So first off, F to focus, shift, right click to get extrude, and now I have this pile of edges over here that is on top of other ones. And now I need to snap it over here, so I'll hold V, no wait, I'll hold D and V to change my pivot point over here by left clicking and moving it. And now when I hold V without D, it's actually going to move it, but it's going to use this as my origin and still hold V to a vertex snap. And then it snaps. These aren't aligned with these bottom ones, but because the ceiling is going to be one big flat plane, I think I can get away with it a little more. If I was really meticulous, I might do some stuff like, yeah, that's only a few things. I'll do it. I might select this vertex here and vert snap it to this one. And then, because it's aligned on everything except the y-axis, now I can hold V for vert snap and the y-axis and just vert snap it back to its neighbors. So V for vert snap to snap there, and V to vert snap back up there. And then lastly this one. V to vert snap there. V to vert snap back. Again, this sort of thing doesn't, I mean, it depends on your industry, whether it's important or not. Architectural renderers and architectural planning and stuff are going to be desperate for this kind of CAD precision. But in a video game, oftentimes it only matters in as much as it's a navigable object. So if it creates a hole in your model and therefore a character can slip through it or clip through it and fall into empty space, you know, then it's a problem. But if it's a slightly less cylindrical looking cylinder that nonetheless reads as a cylinder, ship it. Alright. So I got all that, and now we're back to this giant pile of stuff. Oh, I gotta connect these edges, so I'll select all my faces. Select all. Here, I'm gonna do it in vertex mode. Select all. It's gonna select all those. Mesh tools and merge. Edit mesh, merge. Let me know if you see merge. Merge components. And now those are connected. So now, if I go to edge mode and double click on this, it's going to select that whole edge ring. And you can see by the selection that they're connected. Now from the top view, you can extrude this. And I'll just do one to about there. Hit G and extrude one to about here. I'll hit G again, extrude it down. This is starting to be the center of my thing. I'm going to leave it there for now. If I'm in face mode, or any mode actually, but I want to be in face mode. Let's say I have a ring of faces selected. I can use shift and period, which basically means the bracket arrow, or the, what's it called, caret arrow that way, whatever the word is, to increase my selection, or the comma to decrease my selection. And I can use that to very quickly get this whole ceiling. Or again, you know, there's always multiple ways to do it in 3D. Instead I could go here to the side view, select none, select just this row of faces, and then control left click to deselect those ones, and now I have my faces on the ceiling selected, right? Always different ways to do it. But now what I want to do is go to mesh, extract, or separate. No? Maybe it is extract. Mesh, extract. Now what that did, yeah, it is extract. What that did is it turned this selection of all the ceiling faces into a separate object. And this is really handy because now we can do things like create a layer called ceiling.
You are recording the second one, right?
I am recording this part. Ah, crap, I just renamed the people one. So this is very important because now you can turn your ceiling layer off and actually see the guts of your scene. There might be some problems wherein if you start editing these different objects, you might lose that vertex seam, and you might have, like let's say we did the same thing with the walls here. We go here, we select everything right there, mesh, extract, it's now its own object. We have this versus the floor, and now we can say this is wall. And this is floor. So now it can be very easy to accidentally make a mistake, like, you just move one of these vertices, and because these are no longer connected, it didn't move both of them. Well, that's sort of the pain and beauty of 3D, is you're constantly going around and trying to hunt down those errors and fix them. Right, I think that's all for now. By next week, on Tuesday, I want you to have not only your layout of your scene done, but also some proxy objects. And so, if I were to make the proxy objects, let's see how fast I can do them here. I'm going to select this. Apparently not fast at all. Face mode. Select this one face. Duplicate face. It's a separate object now. Oh, very similar to all the things we've been doing, we can put this image plane object on a file called, or on a layer called reference, and dirt. And you can turn your reference on and off. We can say this is our table. Here's our dude. You can create a polygon primitive. We could actually use this in this particular scene, just because I have the luxury of it. I'll show you an advanced thing really fast. If I move this out on the y-axis, not very good looking, but I can go create, modify, edit, group. When you create a group, all it does is create, and you can see it here in the outliner, this is just a point of hierarchy that this person object is under. What's great is that by grouping him, he's now back in the center of the scene. So I can just very quickly duplicate him. And I can duplicate that group with Control D and duplicate it and rotate it around again. Control D, and rotate it around. And very quickly, I'm starting to have all the proxies for my cowl object. Ah crap, I'm doing one thing wrong. Running out of time to teach you things. I want you to focus while you're doing this, by the way, especially on scenes like the library where you have duplicate books, or things where you have lots of duplication, such as this cowl. Focusing on using instancing. And how you instance is you go Edit, Duplicate Special, and you have to click on this little box to get to the Instance Object panel. But you want to set it to be on Instant. Here, we can reset it to the default settings. You have to set the geometry type to Instance. And now, instead of duplicating with Control D, we can instance with Control Shift D for Duplicate Special. Why is this different, and why is it important? Well, let's say you have all these objects, and you get your cows, and they're moved around, and they're in the different places. And then you want to start working on them. If I duplicate this, and I go into edit mode and start working on it, it's going to be one, but then I would have to re-clone these around my scene. If instead I instance, I can work on them, and it's going to update across all the instance objects. So before you start duplicating, think about that. And I think that's about it for now. So just have some basic cubes, or you can do a little bit of modeling to make them more detailed than cubes, especially something for like a table. It's not very hard to make a table out of multiple cubes. But make sure you have proxy objects for everything in your scene by Tuesday. Got it? Okay, go home. Enjoy your weekend. Have a nervous breakdown about how hard this class is.
So the videos are all about the
It's going to be under week